Good evening, midnight wanderers and stargazers with tired eyes. Before we drift into tonight's story, I hope the day has been gentle with you, wherever on this restless planet you may be. Maybe you're hearing this under a neon sky in Tokyo, or from a quiet kitchen in rural Maine, or in the last hour before dawn somewhere in northern Europe. If you feel like it, let me know. What time is it where you are right now? And what does your window look out onto tonight? If you've just stumbled across DrowsyTeller, welcome. This is the place where forgotten archives, whispered theories, and midnight questions come alive. Not to frighten, but to unsettle softly. And if you've been here before, you already know. Reality has layers. And sleep comes easier when you've peeled one back. Tonight's story begins with a peculiar post that appeared quietly on a conspiracy forum in 2019. No name, no credentials, just a title. What We Hid Up There, a technician's account of Operation Fishbowl, 1962. The contents were unnervingly detailed. Not sensational, not vague, just precise, like someone who had stood too close to something no one was supposed to see. As always, everything you're about to hear is presented as is, whether it's fact, fiction, or something that lives in the strange in-between. That's for you to decide. All I ask is this: dim the lights, close your tabs, and join me in the deep Pacific, where a young radar technician named David Rowe once watched the sky tear open and tried to pretend it didn't. The manuscript of David Rowe, recovered from classified archives 1962 to 1963. My name is David Rowe, and by the time you read this, I'm likely long gone. If you found this, it means my niece discovered the compartment I built into the basement wall, just as I told her to do, should I ever disappear. I'm writing this in 1987, 25 years after the events I'm about to describe. Even now, I wake up in the middle of the night drenched in sweat, haunted by that low-frequency hum that once hung over Johnston Atoll like a curtain of dread. In 1962, I was 28 years old, serving as a radar and telemetry specialist for the United States Air Force, stationed at Vandenberg Air Force Base in California. My security clearance was top secret, standard for my role, but until then, I'd only worked on routine missile tracking operations. That changed on a Tuesday morning in June, when Colonel Morrison summoned me to his office. "Rowe," he began, eyes glued to a file marked with more classification stamps than I'd ever seen. "What's your family situation?" "Sir," I asked, caught off guard. "Wife? Children? Girlfriend? Anyone who might raise hell if you vanished for a while?" I shifted in my seat. "No, sir. Divorced last year. No kids." "Good." He finally looked up, his eyes sunken and hollow, the kind that come from too many sleepless nights and too many secrets. "You ever heard of Johnston Atoll?" "No, sir." Most haven't. It's a dot in the Pacific that officially doesn't exist. But it does, and you're being assigned there. He slid a folder across the desk. "This is your new post. Memorize it. Burn it. You leave tomorrow. 0. 600 inside was a single page. Location: Johnston Atoll, Pacific Ocean. Grid: reference, classified operation, Dominic, subproject. Glass curtain: duration, indefinite. My new title: Atmospheric Radiation Telemetry Calibration Specialist, a term I'd never encountered and certainly didn't understand. "Sir, what exactly does that entail?" Colonel Morrison's jaw clenched. "You'll find out when you arrive. And Rowe, whatever you see, whatever you hear, whatever you think you understand, you don't. Clear?" "Yes, sir. One last thing." He handed me a small metal device. "This is a dosimeter. Keep it on you. If it clicks, go underground. If it screams, pray. The flight to Johnston Atoll lasted 14 hours, with a brief refueling stop in Hawaii. I was the sole passenger on a military transport, and the crew treated me like I was radioactive. They only spoke when offering food that tasted like regret. As we neared the island, I pressed my face to the window. What I saw would be home for the next 18 months. A narrow strip of land, barely 2 miles long and half a mile wide, crowded with airstrips and military structures. The surrounding ocean stretched endlessly. A deep, indifferent blue that made it feel like we were landing on the edge of the world. The moment I stepped off the plane, the heat and humidity hit me like a wall. But there was something more, something unnatural. The air carried a faint metallic tang that made my teeth ache, and a subtle, ever-present vibration seemed to hum just beneath the surface of perception. My dosimeter clicked every so often. I assumed that was to be expected. I was met by a man in civilian clothes, Dr. Reginald Hawthorne, the project director for Glass Curtain. Tall, gaunt, and prematurely gray, he had the look of someone who hadn't seen sunlight or peace of mind in years. His handshake was firm but cold, his eyes as haunted as Morrison's. "Welcome to Johnston Atoll, Mr. Rowe," he said as we got into a waiting jeep. "I trust the flight was bearable?" "Yes, sir, though I'm still unclear on what exactly I'm here to do." "You're responsible for verifying the precision of our atmospheric data during the upcoming tests. We're measuring the effects of high-altitude detonations on the upper layers of the atmosphere." "Detonations? As in nuclear?" "Yes, Mr. R.O. nuclear, detonated far above the Earth." Driving across the island, I noticed a few oddities. First, the personnel count, well over 1,000, seemed excessive for a research operation. Second, the equipment. Massive radar arrays pointed straight at the sky, along with unfamiliar instruments scattered like strange metal growths. But the most disturbing structure was the hangar. Colossal, windowless, double-fenced with razor wire and patrolled by armed guards in unmarked uniforms. "What's in there?" I asked. Dr. Hawthorne tightened his grip on the wheel. "That's not your concern. Your job is telemetry. Focus on that." I was assigned to a Quonset hut shared with 3 others: Bobby Chen, an electronics tech from San Francisco, Marcus Webb, an Army photographer, and Dr. James Kellerman, a physicist who'd worked on classified projects since the Manhattan days. That first night, over a poker game and warm beer, I tried to learn what exactly we were doing on this godforsaken speck of land. "So, what are we really testing?" I asked casually. Bobby looked at Marcus before replying. "Official line? Nuclear effects on comms and satellites." "And unofficially?" Dr. Kellerman looked up from his hand. "We're trying to break something." "Break what?" "You ever hear of the firmament?" I shook my head. "From Genesis," he said. "And God made the firmament, dividing the waters below from the waters above." Most people think it's poetic. Some upstairs think it's literal. "You mean a physical barrier above Earth?" "I'm saying," Kellerman answered, "there are parts of our atmosphere science doesn't explain. We're about to find out what happens when you hit one with a bomb." 3 days later, I was jolted awake at 5 in the morning by a voice over the PA system. "All personnel. This is a drill. Repeat, this is a drill. Code Glass Curtain is now active. Report to your stations. Do not look at the sky. I repeat, do not look at the sky." I threw on my uniform and rushed to the telemetry station, where Dr. Hawthorne was already working with methodical speed. "This isn't just a drill, is it?" I asked. "No," he said, not glancing up. "The real test is in 3 days. This is just to keep people from panicking. when the sky starts falling. What I learned over the following 72 hours would change everything I believed about the nature of our world. They plan to detonate a 1.4 megaton warhead at an altitude of 250 miles, higher than any previous explosion. The official goal was to observe how it affected communications and possibly disrupt enemy satellites. But from the whispered conversations among scientists and officers, I came to understand something else. That wasn't the real purpose. The more I listened, the more I became convinced we weren't being told the full story. The conversations were laced with terms I'd never heard associated with standard nuclear testing. Phrases like vertical containment analysis and atmospheric penetration protocols. They spoke in hushed tones about barrier resistance and firmament interaction procedures. This wasn't just high-level jargon. Beneath every word was a current of unease, sometimes bordering on fear. What unsettled me most was the island-wide emphasis on avoiding the sky. Every single person had been warned not to look up during the detonation. Officially, we were told the blast would be bright enough to cause blindness, even with closed eyes. But the way they stressed it made it clear. Blindness wasn't the real danger. "Whatever you do," Dr. Hawthorne said on the morning of July 9th, "don't look up. Not during the blast, not for 10 minutes after. Keep your eyes on the instruments. Focus on the data, and if you hear anything at all, coming from above, ignore it." "What kind of sounds?" I asked. "The kind that don't belong in our world," he replied quietly. July 9th, 1962, began like every other day in this manufactured purgatory. The sun rose over Johnston Atoll at 0630 hours, casting a sickly red glow across the tarmac, like dried blood smeared on concrete. I'd already been awake since 0400, running pretest diagnostics and trying to ignore the slow churn of dread in my gut. The detonation was scheduled for 0900 hours. At 0800, we were ordered to our stations. Mine was the main telemetry bunker, a fortified concrete vault buried into a rise on the island's northern perimeter. There were no windows. The only illumination came from the pale green radar screens and the pulsing lights of monitoring equipment. Inside with me were Dr. Hawthorne, Bobby Chen, and 2 techs I didn't know. We were all wearing radiation badges, but Hawthorne carried something else, a small, complex device clipped to his belt. It looked like a Geiger counter, but more sophisticated. Multiple dials, additional readouts. I had no idea what it was measuring. "All right, gentlemen," Hawthorne said, his voice calm and flat. "T-minus 10 minutes. You know what to do. Stay on task, record everything, and for the last time, do not look up." At T-minus 5 minutes, the command channel came alive. "Glass curtain control to all stations. Starfish Prime is green for detonation. Confirm sealed status. Telemetry Alpha, sealed and standing by. Photography Bravo, sealed and ready. Atmospheric Charlie, confirmed sealed." And so it continued, one confirmation after another. I kept my eyes on the radar display, watching its silent, sweeping arc. All readings were normal. Air pressure stable, no anomalies. T-minus 60 seconds. T-minus 30, then 10. In my head, I counted the final seconds. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. At precisely 0900 hours, the world changed. Even inside that concrete bunker, even without looking up, the flash found me. It didn't come through a window. It came through everything. Like the light was inside my skull, like someone had ignited the fabric of space. My dosimeter went into overdrive, clicking frantically before leveling out into a high-pitched whine that pierced through bone. But that wasn't the worst of it. For a handful of seconds, no more than 3 or 4, I lost my sense of self. I wasn't in a bunker. I wasn't even on Earth. I was floating above it, detached, weightless, and I could see, God help me, I could see. Jesus Christ, Bobby muttered. Look at the radar. I blinked, trying to force away the vision. When I focused on the radar screen, my mind struggled to interpret what it saw. Instead of the standard field arcs and occasional signal pings, the screen displayed concentric rings, rippling outward from a central point directly above the island, like waves radiating across a still pond. But they weren't just radiating. They were bouncing, echoing, as if they'd struck something solid overhead. "You recording this?" Hawthorne asked, his voice tight. "Yes, sir," I said, "but I don't understand any of it." "None of us do. Just keep logging." The radio crackled to life. "Glass curtain control to all stations. Detonation confirmed at 250 miles altitude. Radiation levels tracking within parameters. Atmospheric response, significant." Significant didn't begin to describe it. The sensors were all over the place. Magnetometers spiked outside theoretical ranges. Pressure data indicated disturbances that couldn't be explained by physics. Communications flickered. Glass curtain control was nearly lost beneath static. Then came the sound. Roughly 5 minutes post-detonation, a low-frequency hum began to descend from above. It wasn't exactly audible. It was more of a sensation, a presence, like being near a massive generator. But it grew stronger, denser, louder, until it seemed to vibrate inside our bones. "You hearing that?" I asked. Hawthorne nodded grimly. "We heard the same during previous shots. Usually lasts just under 60 minutes. What causes it?" He hesitated. "No one knows for sure, but there are theories." The hum continued for 57 minutes before fading abruptly. The silence that followed was suffocating. It felt like the entire planet was holding its breath. Soon after, the reports began. Radio disruption reached all the way to Australia. Several satellites lost contact. In Samoa, observers claimed to witness auroras lighting up the southern night sky, where auroras should never be. But the strangest accounts came from pilots. 3 commercial flights reported seeing a fracture in the sky, a long, dark line stretching from horizon to horizon, visible for several minutes before vanishing. I asked Dr. Hawthorne about it. "Visual artifacts," he said. "EMP can scramble optical processing. There's nothing up there, nothing to worry about." But he didn't believe his own words. I could see it in his eyes. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I was back up there, disembodied, drifting, staring down at Earth with something ancient looming behind me. By 0300, I gave up. I stepped outside. The sky was perfectly clear, and for the first time since arriving on Johnston Atoll, I looked up. What I saw froze my blood. The stars were wrong. I had loved astronomy as a kid. I knew the constellations. I could point out Orion, Leo, Cassiopeia blindfolded. But what I saw wasn't right. Orion was tilted. The Big Dipper was stretched unnaturally wide. And in the spaces that should have been empty, unfamiliar stars flickered. New lights where there had been none. I stood there for 20 minutes, trying to explain it away. Fatigue, eye strain, atmospheric distortion. But the longer I stared, the more certain I became. Something had shifted. Then I noticed Marcus Webb. He was about 50 yards away, setting up a tripod-mounted camera aimed straight up. He wore thick goggles and moved with quiet precision, like someone who wasn't just documenting but searching. I approached him. "Late night?" He flinched. "Jesus, Dave, you startled me." "Couldn't sleep either." "Yeah, something like that." He nodded toward the camera. Hawthorne wanted night sky photos, routine monitoring. At 3 a.m.? Best window for low electromagnetic interference. I examined the gear. It wasn't military standard. Custom lenses, filters I didn't recognize. It was built for something specific. "What are you really looking for?" I asked. He paused, then leaned in. "Officially, auroras, electromagnetic anomalies, and unofficially, we're searching for fractures." "Fractures in what?" "In whatever we hit up there." July 12, 1962. The days following the Starfish Prime detonation were unlike anything I'd ever seen during my time in the military. The scale of the aftermath went far beyond what had been forecast, and the island buzzed with frenetic energy as scientists struggled to decode the readings. Radio systems remained unstable. Long-range signals cut out or bounced back, defying expected paths, as if something in the upper atmosphere was reflecting them. Naval vessels reported navigation errors. Several aircraft had to reroute or land due to sudden, inexplicable equipment failures. But all of that was just the beginning. 3 days after the detonation, the first reports began trickling in. Dead birds, dozens of them, found floating in the lagoon around Johnston Atoll. No signs of trauma, no visible injuries, just lifeless bodies drifting on the water. The base veterinarian conducted examinations but found nothing. No disease, no wounds, no obvious cause of death. It was as if something had simply switched them off mid-flight, dropping them from the sky like fallen leaves, probably disoriented by the electromagnetic pulse, Dr. Hawthorne told me when I asked. Birds navigate using the Earth's magnetic field. The detonation disrupted their internal compass. But I'd seen confused birds before. This wasn't that. These birds hadn't gotten lost. They hadn't wandered into danger. They had stopped. All at once. Simultaneously. As if something had shut down every living circuit in their bodies. The next day, it got stranger. A Navy patrol vessel stationed approximately 50 miles south of Johnston Atoll reported picking up a radar signature of a solid object, circular, unmoving, hovering about 200 meters above sea level. The object's diameter stretched several hundred miles across. "Atmospheric anomaly," Dr. Hawthorne replied when I pressed him about it. "Ionized particles from the blast. They're reflecting radar beams. It'll clear up in a few days." But it didn't clear up. If anything, it became more stable, more distinct. By July 15th, radar arrays as far away as Hawaii were picking up the same object. Circular, stationary, suspended high above the Pacific, invisible to the naked eye. Unmistakable on radar. That was when everything started to unravel. On the morning of July 16th, I was running routine telemetry calibrations when I noticed something strange. The radar return was wrong. Earth's usual curvature was missing. Instead, there were straight lines, perfect geometric lines, crisscrossing the display in a pattern that couldn't be natural. I adjusted the settings, assuming interference from residual ionization. But the pattern remained. Only now it was clearer. Sharper. It looked like a grid. A vast, hexagonal structure laid across the radar field like an invisible lattice. "Bobby," I called out to Chen, who was tuning the radio across the room. "Take a look at this." He walked over, glanced at the display, and froze. "What the hell is that?" "I was hoping you'd tell me." We stood there in silence, staring. The pattern shifted ever so slightly, pulsing like circuitry rendered in phosphorescent green. It was mesmerizing and terrifying, because it wasn't random, it wasn't atmospheric distortion. It was designed. "Should we report this?" Bobby asked, voice low. Before I could answer, Dr. Hawthorne appeared behind us. "Report what?" I pointed to the screen. "This. It's been there for 20 minutes now." His expression changed instantly. His face drained of color. "Shut it off," he said. "Sir?" "Turn off the radar. Now." "Is something wrong with the system?" "There's nothing wrong with the machine," he said. "It's what it's seeing that's the problem. Turn it off." I did as instructed. The screen went black. The grid vanished. Dr. Hawthorne remained silent for several seconds, staring at the now dark monitor. Then he turned to us, eyes heavy with something between exhaustion and warning. "I need to know I can count on you," he said. "What you just saw is classified at the highest level. It doesn't go in the logs, it isn't discussed. And if you're smart, you won't spend time thinking about it." "Yes, sir," Bobby said immediately. I hesitated. "Sir, what did we just see?" Dr. Hawthorne didn't answer right away. Then, finally, something that's not supposed to exist. Something that's always been there. We just couldn't detect it until we hit it hard enough. That night, I couldn't shake the image of the grid from my mind. It wasn't just foreign. It was familiar, in some eerie way I couldn't place. I lay awake in my bunk, staring at the metal ceiling, trying to connect fragments of memory. They told us we were testing the effects of high-altitude nuclear explosions on satellites and radio communications. But I didn't buy that anymore. The equipment was wrong, the personnel were wrong, and their fear, the quiet panic behind their eyes, told me there was something else, something they had been chasing and had finally found. Around 200 hours, I made up my mind. I needed to know what was inside the hangar. I slipped out of my bunk and moved through the base in silence, avoiding patrols whose routes I had memorized during sleepless nights. The hangar loomed on the southern edge of the island, encircled by double fencing and watched over by guards who weren't taking any chances. But I'd been sneaking around installations since I was a private. I knew how to go unnoticed. At the rear of the hangar, a drainage channel ran close to the fence. It stank and was choked with stagnant water, but it gave me cover. I crawled through the filth until I reached a spot where I could peer through a gap in the inner barrier. There was a small high window on the hangar's rear wall. Through it, I saw everything. This wasn't a storage bay, it wasn't a weapons vault. Inside was an array of scientific instruments. Machines more at home in a deep space observatory than on a classified military outpost. Telescopes, spectral analyzers, strange, custom-built devices I couldn't identify. But what covered the walls is what truly stunned me. Photographs. Hundreds of them. Maybe thousands. Meticulously arranged in grid patterns along every surface. Each photo showed the sky above Johnston Atoll, but not as we saw it. These were taken with specialized equipment, revealing hidden structures, symmetrical patterns, unnatural geometry. Some were blurry, others crisp, but many showed the same impossible lattice, the hexagonal grid from the radar display, and some showed cracks, thin black fractures running through the grid like shattering glass. In some images they were barely visible. In others, wide enough to expose something behind the pattern. Something dark. Not the dark of space. Something deeper. Something else. I was still staring when I noticed a cabinet with a label. Firmament Reaction Event, Prism 6. There it was again. Firmament, that old word. The mythical dome said to separate the heavens from the earth. A concept most had written off as ancient poetry. I was about to get a closer look when I heard footsteps. I ducked, pressing myself flat into the ditch. 2 guards walked past. "I still can't believe what's in those photos," one said. "Believe it, the other replied. "I've been here since the April test. Every time we hit it, it gets weaker, and every time it weakens and we see a little more of what's behind it. What do you think's back there?" "I don't know. I don't want to know. But I'll tell you this. Whatever it is, it's been watching us. And now that we've cracked the shell, it's watching closer." They moved on. I waited 10 more minutes, then crept back through the ditch and disappeared into the darkness. I didn't sleep, because for the first time I understood. This wasn't just about nuclear tests. We weren't measuring blast effects. We were attacking something ancient, something that had always been there, something that had either kept us in or kept something else out. And with each test, the boundary grew thinner. The only question was, what would happen when it finally broke? July 18th, 1962. 9 days after detonation. I was jolted awake at 0430 by the sound of sirens, an unfamiliar alarm, shrill and discordant, echoing from every direction. I rushed outside, expecting a fire or containment failure. Instead, I found the entire base gathered in the courtyard, staring skyward. The aurora was back. But this time, it was different. The sky above Johnston Atoll writhed with impossible colors: deep violet, searing green, electric blue. The lights pulsed and flowed like a living thing, shifting and twisting in hypnotic patterns. And within those colors were forms, shapes, angles, fractals, moving with deliberate mathematical grace. They weren't random, they weren't natural, they were speaking. "Beautiful, isn't it?" Dr. Hawthorne said, appearing beside me, but his tone was strained, uneasy. "What's causing it?" "Secondary effects," he replied quickly. "The magnetic field is still stabilizing, just a side effect of residual disruption." But even as he spoke, he didn't sound convinced. Those lights were too organized, too intentional. "Dr. Hawthorne," I asked quietly, "what are we really doing here?" He didn't answer at first. He just stood there staring at the sky. Then, softly, "We're explorers, Mr. R.O. We're trying to understand the true nature of this world, and sometimes that means pushing boundaries that perhaps weren't meant to be touched. And if we go too far..." He looked at me. "Then we find out what's on the other side." The aurora remained for 3 more hours, and the sky never fully returned to normal. Then, just as abruptly as it had appeared, the aurora faded. But its effects lingered throughout the day. People across the base reported unsettling experiences, a persistent sense of being observed, strange sounds without a source, and fleeting movements caught just at the edge of vision. The most disturbing account came from Dr. Kellerman, the physicist who had once worked on the Manhattan Project. He claimed to have seen figures within the aurora, humanoid shapes watching the island from above. "Most likely pareidolia," Dr. Hawthorne said when I brought it up. "The mind creates patterns where none exist. Stress triggers hallucinations." But I'd seen Kellerman that morning, seen how he looked at the sky. That wasn't the look of a man seeing illusions. That was the expression of someone who had witnessed something that broke his understanding of reality. Later that afternoon, I was in the telemetry station when Bobby Chen burst in, his face pale and electric with fear and excitement. "Dave," he said, breathless, "you've got to hear this." He dragged me into the communications room, where he had been monitoring regional frequencies across the Pacific. The radio hissed with static, but buried within the interference was something else, a pulsing rhythm. It was tonal, almost melodic. "It started an hour ago," Bobby said. "It's broadcasting from directly above, same band as our standard comms, but way stronger than anything we've ever picked up." I leaned in to listen. The sound was hypnotic, hauntingly beautiful, but wrong. It made my skin prickle, my teeth ached. "Did you tell Dr. Hawthorne?" I tried. He told me to stop listening and stick to authorized channels. But you didn't. Number and Dave, I think it's a message. The structure's too organized to be random. We spent the next hour trying to decode the signal, but it was beyond us. It wasn't just a broadcast. It was layered, filled with harmonic complexity and patterns too intricate for our instruments to decipher. "Bobby," I said eventually, "there's something I need to tell you, something I saw inside the restricted hangar." I told him everything. The photographs on the hangar walls, the structured sky patterns, the cracks labeled as reactions in the firmament, the guard's conversation, and my belief that Operation Fishbowl wasn't about weapons at all. "So, what are we actually doing here?" he asked. "I think we're trying to break through something ancient, something that's either been protecting us or containing us, and I think it's working." That night, I made a choice. I was going to document everything I could, regardless of the consequences. I found an old camera in the storage room and began photographing everything. Telemetry anomalies, radar patterns, the aurora, and especially the sky. What the naked eye couldn't see, the lens revealed. Through the camera, the sky wasn't just stars and atmosphere, it was structure. The grid was real, hexagonal, uniform, and vast, spanning the entire horizon. An artificial symmetry too precise to be natural. Cracks split across the pattern like fractures in tempered glass. Some were barely visible. Others were wide enough that I could see what lay beyond. And what I saw did not belong in this world. I shot dozens of frames, using different filters and exposure times. Some revealed the grid, others showed the cracks. And a few, those I would never forget, captured what was behind those cracks. It wasn't empty. It wasn't space. It was a darkness that had texture, movement, something that gave the sense of presence. And inside that void, shapes. Not stars, not planets. Geometric forms that defied physical laws, floating, shifting, existing in ways the human brain wasn't meant to comprehend. They moved with elegance and intent. But what shook me most was the feeling they were looking back. On July 20th, Dr. Hawthorne called me to his office for what he described as a routine progress review. But the moment I walked in, I knew it wasn't routine. Two men in civilian suits sat flanking his desk. They had the stiff, unreadable posture of intelligence operatives. "Mr. Rowe," Hawthorne said, "these gentlemen are from Washington. They have a few questions." The older one introduced himself as Mr. Smith. The name was obviously fake. Silver hair, cold eyes. The younger one, Mr. Jones, never spoke. "We're aware you've taken an unusual approach to your duties," Smith said, placing a file on the desk and opening it. Inside were my photographs. These were found in your quarters during a routine sweep. My stomach dropped. "I can explain. I'm sure you can," Smith interrupted. "But I don't think you grasp the seriousness of what you've done. These images depict highly classified material. In the wrong hands, they could lead to catastrophic consequences." He paused. "Do you understand what you're looking at, Mr. Rowe?" I hesitated. "The ceiling of the world?" He nodded slowly. "Exactly. And those cracks, they're the result of our efforts." He leaned forward, voice low. "Do you know what the firmament is, Mr. Rowe?" "The biblical barrier," I said, "between the waters above and below." "Correct. It's been shielding us for thousands of years, separating us from what's out there, keeping us hidden or protected. Maybe both." He pointed to the photographs. "But each detonation brings another fracture. Each crack reveals more. What's beyond it? Awareness, intelligence, something with design and purpose, something that's been watching, waiting, and now that the shell has weakened, it's watching more closely. Smith stood and stared out the window. There's another test tomorrow night, but this one is different. We're focusing all energy at a single point. If our math is right, we'll open a breach wide enough for contact. Contact with what? We don't know. Your job is to document everything, every signal, every shift, every pattern. What we learn may shape the future of civilization. I left in a daze. The truth was clear. This wasn't weapons testing. This was an assault on the sky itself. That night I didn't sleep. I sat thinking about the grid, the cracks, the forms, the presence that watched. And at around 0300 hours, I heard it again, the hum. Only this time it was more than sound. It was language, not spoken but impressed, injected into my mind. I opened the window. The sky was cloudless. The constellations, wrong, distorted, stretched. Then, before my eyes, the stars moved, not drifting, aligning. Within minutes, they formed a perfect hexagonal grid, and in its center, blackness. A void in the sky, pulsing faintly. From within it, shapes emerged. Not solid, but vivid. Not creatures, but entities made of motion, light, and impossible geometry. They moved with purpose. And as they moved, I understood. Not the language, but the emotion, the intent. Urgency, curiosity, caution. The vision lasted 10 minutes. Then, as if nothing had happened, the sky returned to normal. The grid dissolved. The stars slipped back into place. But everything had changed. The barrier was weakening, and something was reaching through. The next test was scheduled for 2100 hours on July 21st. But this one was different. This time, the warhead wouldn't explode in the traditional sense. It was engineered to direct its energy forward. A focused stream designed not to radiate, but to pierce. Dr. Hawthorne called it a drill-tip warhead, meant not to destroy but to open a doorway. All day I ran telemetry checks, but my thoughts remained locked on what I had seen and felt. They knew. At 1800 hours, Marcus Webb appeared at the telemetry bunker's door, wild-eyed and visibly shaken. "Dave," he said, "you need to see this." He led me to a makeshift darkroom set up behind the bunker. The walls were covered in photographic prints, plates he had developed over the last few days. "I've been cataloging the sky," he said, "and I found something." He handed me one image. It showed the night above Johnston Atoll, not with stars, but with structure. The grid. But not just the grid, the cracks, dozens, widening, spreading like impact fractures across glass. The sky was breaking. And we had no idea what would come through, like a spider web. "When did you take this?" I asked. 3 days ago, Marcus replied. "But look at this one." He handed me another photograph, this one taken just the night before. The cracks had grown, wider, more numerous. In several spots I could see straight through them into the dark void beyond. "It's getting worse," Marcus said. "The cracks are spreading more every day." Then he looked at me and added, "And Dave, I think I know why." He pulled out a folder marked Classified, Eyes Only, and flipped it open. Inside were intricate technical schematics, blueprints of the drill-tip warhead. The engineering detail was astonishing. This wasn't a weapon built for destruction. It was something else. A precision instrument. "They're not trying to break the firmament," Marcus said. "They're trying to open a door." Before I could respond, the lights in the storage room flickered and cut out. We were suddenly wrapped in darkness, illuminated only by the faint red glow of the safe light in the dark room. And in that dim red light I saw something that made my blood freeze. The photographs on the walls had changed. What had been still images of patterns and cracks were now moving. The shapes beyond the fractures were no longer static. They were shifting, expanding, pressing closer to the barrier, as if approaching from the other side. "Are you seeing this?" I whispered. Marcus nodded slowly, his face pale and tight with fear. "They know we're here. They know what we're trying to do." Moments later, the lights snapped back on. The photographs returned to their original state, motionless. But the unease remained. Something had shifted. We weren't just observing something foreign anymore. We were being observed, and not only by what lay beyond the firmament, but possibly by the firmament itself. At 20:30 hours, all personnel were ordered to their designated stations for the second test. I returned to the telemetry bunker alongside Dr. Hawthorne, Bobby Chen, and Dr. Kellerman. The air inside buzzed with tension, thick, electric, and close. "Gentlemen," Dr. Hawthorne said, his voice calm but intense, "tonight we step into history. Tonight we open a door that has remained sealed since time began. Whatever happens, whatever you see or hear, remember, you are witnessing the next stage in human evolution." At 20:50 hours, the countdown began. But something felt different. Even before the detonation, our instruments were going wild. The upper atmosphere was already alive with activity. Electromagnetic readings were spiking. Harmonic frequencies hinted that something above us had already begun to respond. "You seeing this?" Kellerman asked, visibly shaken. "Seeing what?" He pointed to the readouts. "It's vibrating. The entire firmament, it's resonating like some kind of instrument." I checked my screen. He was right. Clear waveforms pulsed across the data. Whatever was up there, it was reacting, resonating, responding, T-minus 60 seconds. The vibration intensified. The bunker began to tremble. It felt as if the very ground was reacting to the sky above. T-minus 30 seconds. Then came the sound, but it wasn't the low, oppressive hum from the first test. This was different. It was music. Haunting, layered harmonies, not vocal, but something deeper, more mathematical. It was a language made of tone. It was beautiful. And it was terrifying. T-minus 10 seconds. The sound swelled into a chorus of impossible voices, singing through the walls, through our bones. And then came the light. A soft, pulsing glow began seeping through the concrete, matching the rhythm of the music. 5, 2, 1. The drill tip warhead detonated at precisely 2100 hours, 250 miles above Johnston Atoll, but there was no blinding flash. This was something else. The light rose slowly, like a sunrise in reverse, intensifying until the sky became pure luminescence. And then I saw it. Not with my eyes. Through the walls. Through the ceiling. Through the world itself. The firmament. Not a ceiling, not a shield. It was a vast, living construct. Geometric, radiant, breathing with intelligence and design. A structure of purpose and will. And at its heart, where the warhead had struck, there was no crack. There was a door. And something was stepping through. It was not a creature. It was not even a being in the traditional sense. It was geometry given form. Pure, moving architecture, descending with grace and impossible complexity. It shimmered with intent, and as it hovered above the earth, I could feel its voice, not words, but meaning, transmitted through color, motion, and vibration. And one message was perfectly clear. We have been waiting. The entity hovered for exactly 17 seconds. During that time, every instrument on the island went haywire. Radiation levels spiked, magnetic fields twisted. The very air seemed to pulse with unfamiliar energy. Then, just as quickly it retreated. The doorway closed. The light faded. The sound vanished. We were alone again. But it was not the same silence. It was the silence of a world that had changed. In the following days, the official report described the second test as a partial success with minor anomalies. Radiation levels were within expected variance. Electromagnetic feedback was within tolerances. No mention of the light, or the music, or the contact. But we knew the truth. Dr. Kellerman was the first to break. 3 days later, he was found in his quarters, scribbling obsessively in his notebook. There's something on the other side. There's something on the other side. There's something on the other side. They sedated him. He was airlifted from the island by the end of the day. Next was Marcus Webb. He became consumed by his photographs, developing the same plates over and over, muttering about faces in the light. He insisted the entities were trying to speak, communicating through shape and shadow. Then, one night, he vanished, along with all his negatives and camera gear. The official word: breakdown, relocation, medical leave. But I saw the same men in civilian clothes who had once questioned me escort him out. Bobby Chen held on the longest, but he eventually cracked too. He began hearing something in the radio static, not the haunting music from the test, but something harsher, something screaming. One morning, I found him hunched in the communications room, twisting knobs frantically, whispering to himself, "They're angry. We broke their shelter, and now they're angry." By nightfall, he was gone too. That left only me, Doctor, Hawthorne, and a few others. The ones who hadn't seen what we'd seen, or the ones who were just better at pretending. But even Hawthorne was unraveling. He'd lost weight. His hands shook, and sometimes I'd catch him staring skyward with empty eyes, as if remembering something his mind couldn't fully contain. On August 15th, 1 month after the second detonation, he summoned me to his office. I expected another mission briefing. What I found was Hawthorne pacing behind his desk, a half-empty bottle of whiskey resting beside a stack of reports. "Sit down, Ro," he said without turning. I sat. He paced in silence for several minutes, then finally stopped at the window and stared out toward the sea. "Do you understand what we've done?" he asked. "Sir? Do you grasp what we've unleashed?" I didn't lie. I think we opened a door that should have stayed shut. He gave a hollow laugh. "A door, yes, that's one name for it. We opened a gateway into another domain, a place parallel to ours, a reality made of energy and math, populated by entities that have watched us since the beginning. What do they want? I don't know, but they're not pleased." He turned to me. The firmament wasn't just a boundary, Ro, it was protection. A lock. It kept us from them, and them from us. He paused. "There's going to be a third test, October 12th, and this one, it's going to rip the firmament open, for good. Can't you stop it?" He laughed again, louder this time, bordering on hysteria. "Stop it. I was never in charge. The ones behind this, they want contact. They think they can harness what's on the other side. They believe they can control it." His eyes locked onto mine. They don't understand. Some doors, once opened, can never be closed. That night, I made my decision. I would escape Johnston Atoll. I would take the evidence, and I would tell the world. I spent the next week preparing. I copied what I could, design specs for the warhead, raw telemetry from both tests, anything incriminating. I also took one of Marcus's undeveloped plates, the one that most clearly showed the hole in the sky. The plan was simple. Sneak onto the next supply flight, hide in the cargo bay, and stay hidden until we reached Hawaii. But the night before the flight, they came for me. I woke to footsteps. Sharp, deliberate, wrong. I had just enough time to slip the photographic plate into my sock before the door flew open. Mr. Smith and Mr. Jones stood in the frame. 2 armed guards flanked them. Smith held a syringe filled with a clear liquid. "Time for debriefing, Mr. Rowe," he said. I bolted, but the guards were faster. They pinned me down. Smith leaned in, and the needle sank into my neck. The drug hit fast. Warmth, weight, darkness. Then, nothing. "Don't worry," Mr. Smith said as my vision blurred. "It won't hurt. You'll just forget a few things. Unimportant things, classified things." But the drug didn't work the way they expected. Maybe it was adrenaline. Maybe sheer will. Somehow, I managed to hold on to most of my memories. The finer details faded, but the core truths burned themselves into my mind. The geometric shapes etched across the sky, the widening cracks in the firmament, and the entities that watched us from the other side. I was flown off Johnston Atoll the following morning. Officially, I was discharged from the Air Force due to psychological distress brought on by prolonged deployment in a hostile environment. My security clearance was revoked, my service record sealed. I was issued a quiet, final warning about the consequences of discussing anything I had seen with anyone who lacked authorization. They thought they had erased me. They were wrong. For the next 25 years, I devoted my life to rebuilding the truth. What had really happened at Johnston Atoll, and what it meant for the future of humanity. I combed through every scrap of data I could find on Operation Fishbowl, studied declassified documents, and hunted down former personnel who'd been stationed there in the summer of 1962. Most were already gone. Suicides, strange accidents, sudden illnesses blamed on radiation exposure. The few survivors I located were either too traumatized to speak or had undergone the same memory suppression procedures I had. But I gathered enough to confirm what I already knew in my bones. Operation Fishbowl was never about testing nuclear weapons. It was about breaking through the firmament, about making contact with whatever lived beyond it. The third and final test went forward as scheduled on October 12, 1962, just days before the Cuban Missile Crisis brought the world to the brink of nuclear annihilation. The official statement called it another partial success. But I know the truth. That third detonation didn't just crack the sky. It opened it. It tore a permanent hole in the firmament, a doorway, a breach that is never fully closed. The signs are all around us, if you know where to look. The unexplained surge in UFO sightings beginning in late 1962. The strange geometric distortions that sometimes appear in the night sky. The growing number of people who report hearing voices in the static. Voices that speak not in words, but in frequency and form. They are still watching, beyond the sky, gazing through the fractures we made. And they are not pleased. I've hidden this manuscript in a place where it will eventually be found, alongside the one photographic plate I managed to smuggle out of Johnston. It reveals the firmament as it truly is. Not an abstract concept or metaphor, but a living architecture. And at the center, clearly visible, is the hole, black, yawning, unhealed, where the drill-tip warhead made contact. Behind that hole lies a darkness unlike space. A darkness that pulses with intelligence. Within it are shapes. Things that don't move the way we move. That don't exist the way we understand existence. But they are there, watching, waiting. The government has known this since 1962. They've buried the evidence, silenced the witnesses, and maintained the illusion that Operation Fishbowl was just another Cold War missile test. But truth cannot stay buried forever, and when it surfaces, when the world finally understands what we unleashed that summer, I just pray it isn't too late to close the gate we opened. They told us it was just a test, but what they were testing wasn't a weapon. It was the sky, and now that we've fractured it, something is looking back, something that was never meant to walk among us. God help us all. New narrative. Begins. Recovered journal. Entry. Classification. Redacted subject. Eli Granger. Independent investigative journalist. Date range. July 15th to 18th, 2023. Location. Bohemian Grove, Monte Rio, California. Following account was retrieved from a secured and encrypted server farm in Iceland. The current whereabouts of journalist Eli Granger are unknown. My name is Eli Granger, and I'm writing this because I might not live long enough to speak it aloud. What I witnessed in the forests of Northern California will follow me into the grave, whenever that comes. It started 3 weeks ago with an email that should never have existed. I was in my cramped Oakland apartment, sipping my third coffee, trawling through encrypted message boards where whistleblowers sometimes surfaced. My secure inbox pinged. No subject line. The sender's address was a randomized string, routed through multiple proxies. There was an attachment and 4 cryptic lines of text. You want truth? Go to the Redwoods. Bring a black suit and a quiet soul. July 15th to 18th. The fire reveals all. The attachment was a high-resolution scan of what looked like a guest registry for Bohemian Grove, the legendary all-male retreat where the world's most powerful allegedly gather every summer to commune with nature. I'd reported on the Grove before, mostly speculation and grainy photos from the 1980s. But this was different. The names on the list made my skin crawl. Former presidents, sitting senators, CEOs of the largest tech conglomerates, private military contractors, big pharma executives, media titans who shape narratives across continents, all confirmed attendees of something called the Mid-Summer Encampment. At the bottom of the document was a forged ID badge with my name and photo, a professional headshot I'd never taken, digitally altered to show me in a black suit and tie. The name read, Edmund Gray, Logistics Consultant, Prometheus Industries. Whoever created it had access to data I never shared publicly. Someone powerful wanted me inside, and I had no idea why. I should have closed the file, deleted the message, and gone back to safe stories, tax loopholes, union corruption, shady real estate deals. But I didn't. Instead, I packed a black suit and headed north. The road to Monte Rio weaves through cathedral-like redwoods, a green tunnel that feels sacred and ancient. The kind of place you'd expect to find yoga retreats and farm-to-table diners, not a clandestine gathering of the global elite. I checked into a roadside motel in Guerneville and scouted the perimeter that night. Bohemian Grove spans over 2,000 acres, encased in dense forest and wrapped in razor wire, motion sensors hidden in the underbrush, cameras mounted high in trees, the entrance manned by guards dressed like military special ops, black tactical gear, earpieces, mirrored sunglasses. The pass worked, too easily. They scanned it, nodded, and let me through. Either the forger was a genius, or someone inside the Grove wanted me to enter. Neither option comforted me. Inside, it was like stepping into a meticulously curated wilderness theme park. Gravel paths led past rustic lodges with names like Caveman's Den, Owl's Nest, and Dragon's Lair. The setting was beautiful, but the atmosphere was wrong. The men weren't just powerful. They knew they were powerful. They carried themselves with the eerie calm of people who control economies, shape elections, and rewrite history. They wore linen shirts and boat shoes. But I overheard what they said when they thought no one was listening. Shanghai market correction will trigger on Thursday. Notify Langley. Nightfall is cleared. 72-hour blackout confirmed. I kept my cover, clipboard in hand, eyes down. My phone was confiscated at the gate and replaced with a sanitized device. No SIM, no GPS, just a camera and a flashlight. Rich men ignore the help, which made me invisible. Still, something kept catching my eye. Owls, everywhere, etched into the bark of trees, embroidered into cabin drapes, burned into wooden signs. Not whimsical cartoon owls, stylized, angular, watching. The largest stood 40 feet tall, a stone effigy on an island in the center of a private lake. Even in broad daylight, it radiated a deep, cold presence. Beautiful, isn't she? The voice startled me. An elderly man stood nearby, immaculately dressed, silver-haired, eyes pale as ice. She's watched over this place for more than a century, he said. Some believe she's just a symbol. He turned to me and smiled faintly. But others know better. Know better how? I asked, immediately regretting it. I was supposed to be invisible, unremarkable. The old man smiled, revealing teeth that were far too white and perfectly aligned for someone his age. You'll see tonight, Mr. Gray. The cremation of care waits for no man, not even consultants. Before I could say another word, he turned and walked away, leaving me standing alone at the foot of the giant owl statue, wondering just how much of my cover had already been blown. As twilight settled over the grove, the mood shifted. The casual, almost collegiate camaraderie of the day evaporated, replaced by a heavy, solemn intensity. Men emerged from their cabins dressed in long, hooded robes that concealed their faces in shadow. Some carried torches. Others bore arcane objects I couldn't identify. I returned to my own assigned cabin and found a robe neatly folded on the bed, along with a card that read, "Attendance is mandatory. Silence is sacred. The owl sees all." What I witnessed that night will stay with me forever. As darkness fell, hundreds of robed men moved in silence through the trees, converging on the lake where the towering owl loomed like a sentry carved from myth. Torchlight flickered among the branches, casting shadows that danced like spirits. The only sounds were shuffling feet and the rustle of fabric against bark. I joined the procession, head lowered, hood raised. The robe smelled faintly of incense, and something else, something earthy, organic, faintly rancid. It clung to me in a way I couldn't shake. The group assembled in a natural amphitheater etched into the hillside. The owl's eyes glowed faintly red in the firelight. A small wooden boat had been placed at the edge of the lake. Inside, it lay a white-shrouded figure. At first, I assumed it was symbolic, an effigy, but the proportions were disturbingly lifelike. The weight distribution looked real. The cloth didn't hang like it was covering straw or plastic. It clung, tight around whatever was beneath. Then a figure stepped onto a raised platform beside the owl. Even veiled, I knew the voice. A former president, one whose face had once dominated the evening news. His words echoed across the lake, amplified by concealed speakers embedded in the forest. "Brothers of the Grove," he intoned, "we gather beneath the ancient gaze of wisdom to perform the sacred rite that frees us from the burden of conscience." The crowd answered in unison. "We banish care and cast it to the flames." Care, that pale and mortal thing that binds the hands of power. Care, that whispers doubt into the ears of kings, care that hinders the sword of necessary action. Again, the response, "We banish care and cast it to the flames." The ceremony continued for nearly an hour, a slow, methodical chant interspersed with invocations, many addressed to names I recognized from the deepest corners of ancient mythology. Moloch, the Carthaginian god of sacrifice; Lil, lord of storms, and fate from Sumerian lore. These weren't just historical references. These were calls, and the men reciting them weren't politicians or CEOs in that moment. They were believers. The most unsettling part wasn't the ritual itself. It was the ease with which they performed it. These were world leaders, financial power brokers, architects of global infrastructure. Yet they treated this grotesque rite like a corporate retreat icebreaker. The climax came when the boat was pushed out into the lake. Jets of flame erupted along its perimeter, igniting the vessel in an orange blaze. The figure inside caught quickly. The fabric burned away. And beneath, I don't know. Maybe it was a lifelike mannequin, animated by collapsing supports. Maybe the high-pitched whimpering was synthetic. Maybe, but the way some of the men wept, the way others raised their arms in ecstatic reverence, it didn't feel like performance. As the fire dimmed and the ashes sank beneath the surface, the crowd began to disperse. I turned to leave when a firm hand landed on my shoulder. "Mr. Gray." It was him again, the old man, still robed, still smiling. "You're invited to the inner circle tonight. A rare honor for a consultant." Before I could answer, two more figures emerged behind me. They weren't overtly hostile, but it was clear this wasn't an invitation I could decline. They led me away from the main trail, into a part of the forest that didn't appear on any map. There, in a shadowed clearing lit only by starlight, 30 men stood in a circle around a fire pit carved into bare stone. No pageantry, no torchlight, no performance. This was older, this was real. At midnight, the ritual began. The robes were replaced by masks, owl faces carved from ivory-colored bone, with hollow eye sockets and beak-like contours. The men moved in unison, their steps choreographed like a sacred ballet passed down across generations. The former president stepped forward. Without his earlier regalia, he seemed smaller. Just another disciple. "Brothers of the Inner Grove," he said, "we come to receive the wisdom of the Ancient Ones, and to consecrate the designs that will shape the world." The reply came in a language I couldn't place. Rough, fragmented, consonant-heavy. It sounded primal, worn smooth by time, but my military linguistics training kicked in. It wasn't gibberish, it was Adian, a Proto-Semitic dialect allegedly spoken in ancient Mesopotamia, a dead language, supposedly lost for over 2,000 years. And yet here they were, speaking it fluently, with purpose. They chanted names, swore oaths, drew glyphs in ash that matched sigils I'd seen in redacted CIA documents, relics from Project MK Ultra, supposedly shut down decades ago. Apparently, it had simply gone deeper underground. Maps were spread across stone tables, not political maps, geostrategic overlays, resource networks, trade routes, population densities, target zones, and they planned aloud, in Adian, in English, conflicts to incite, economies to collapse, populations to suppress. They spoke not as citizens or officials, but as instruments of the Ancient Ones, preparing the earth for their arrival. "The harvest nears," one mask-wearer said. "The seals weaken, the sleepers stir." And the rest answered, "Let the work continue." I remained just beyond the circle, hidden by the shadows and recording everything via a covert mic embedded in my shoe's sole. This wasn't a conspiracy. It wasn't politics. It was a cult. And whether the forces they served were real or imagined didn't matter. What mattered was that they believed. And their policies, shaped in ritual, born of devotion, would touch billions. The ritual ended with each man drinking from a silver chalice. The liquid inside shimmered black in the firelight. Several convulsed after sipping, eyes rolling back into their skulls. As the sky lightened with the approach of dawn, they removed their masks, and I saw the faces. Former presidents, sitting senators, defense officials, billionaire executives. They shook hands like closing a corporate merger, because, in essence, they were. I slipped away as the redwoods blushed with first light, heart pounding. But I knew I couldn't stay. The stares, the nods, the knowing smirks, they were letting me see. But not out of trust. It was a warning. Still, there was one more place I had to investigate before I escaped. Lodge of Styx. Unauthorized entry log. The lodge marked Styx was removed from the central camp, linked only by an unmarked service road absent from any guest map. I'd taken note of it on my first walkthrough, but tonight I would approach. The exterior appeared unremarkable. Standard timber walls, rustic charm. But the security setup was anything but. Biometric scanners, pulse-based motion sensors, electromagnetic locks rated for military-grade encryption. Luckily, I had help. Sewn into my jacket's inner lining was a disguised USB drive, gifted by my anonymous contact. It housed intrusion software capable of penetrating military firewalls in under 15 seconds. I plugged it into the access panel. The lights flickered. 15 seconds of system blindness. The locks disengaged. Whoever set this up wasn't just experienced. They were inside. I slipped through. What I found beyond that door wasn't a cabin. It was a facade, a false front. Behind a camouflaged bookshelf lay another keypad, coded and shielded. I entered the blind passcode from the device. The wall slid open, and stone stairs spiraled down into the earth. Not built, carved, ancient. The walls were not modern construction. They bore marks of chisels, centuries old. Symbols had been engraved deep into the stone. Some I recognized from Mesopotamian cylinder seals. Others I didn't recognize at all. Electric lighting had been added, clearly recent, but it served only to reveal what had always been there. And at the bottom of those stairs, a heavy oak door creaked open, revealing a chamber that defied all logic. The room extended far beyond the lodge's surface footprint above. Lining its stone walls were shelves filled with leather-bound journals, rolled scrolls, and artifacts spanning centuries, some possibly even older. At the heart of the room stood a massive table, carved from a single slab of black stone. Its surface was cluttered with maps, blueprints, and what appeared to be authentic government documents, complete with official seals and signatures. I started with the journals, randomly selecting one from a shelf labeled 1923 to 1945. The handwriting was elegant, deliberate, but the content was anything but antiquated. The European situation progresses as planned. Our collaborators in Berlin remain obedient, unaware they serve not a nation, but the ancient ones. The blood of the lesser tribes will provide the spiritual fuel for the next stage of the great work. Another, more recent entry read, Operation Mockingbird has exceeded projections. Media outlets echo our cues without hesitation, convinced they act in service of truth, all while disseminating the narratives we need to maintain psychological control. The sleeping multitudes accept whatever reality we shape. But it was the materials on the black stone table that shattered any lingering illusion of the world I thought I knew. There were schematics for the USA Patriot Act, dated 6 months prior to the September 11th attacks in 2001. Detailed plans for the Iraq invasion, complete with fabricated intelligence alleging weapons of mass destruction. Rough drafts of early social media algorithms, not designed for connection, but for division, crafting echo chambers and conflict to ensure easier manipulation. More recent documents made my skin crawl. Global pandemic response models that prioritized control over health. Digital currency infrastructures designed to eliminate privacy and enforce absolute traceability. Population reduction strategies veiled behind language of environmental sustainability. But the most chilling item was a roster of participants, an unbroken list stretching back to the 1870s, when the Bohemian Club was founded. Many names were familiar: robber barons, oil magnates, media kings, but others predated even that era by centuries. Either the records were wildly inaccurate, or some attendees weren't entirely human. At the bottom of the most recent page, freshly penned, E. Granger, journalist, observed Inner Circle ceremony, July 16, 2023. Status: asset or liability. Recommend termination if non-compliant by dawn, July 18th. They had known who I was from the start: the mysterious email, the forged credentials, the seemingly flawless access. It had all been part of a test, and I had failed. Somewhere nearby, a sensor pinged softly. Red LEDs blinked to life on the walls. Footsteps echoed, measured, heavy. A tactical team descending the stairs with purpose. I crammed as many documents into my jacket as I could and scanned the room for another exit. There was only one, and it was about to be filled with men who didn't plan to let me walk away. The voices grew clearer, short commands in clipped military cadence. Then, sudden darkness. A moment later, emergency lighting kicked on, casting everything in a deep red glow, and in that flicker between darkness and bloodlight, I heard something impossible. A voice, not in my ears but in my mind. Run, little journalist. Run and tell the world what you have seen. But know this: to reveal the truth is to forfeit your life. The salvation of humanity demands sacrifices greater than yours. When the light stabilized, a previously seamless wall had opened, revealing a tunnel, narrow and steep, carved deeper into the rock. I didn't hesitate. Whatever that voice was, it had given me a chance. I took it. The passage beneath the grove was ancient, worn. It connected caverns and corridors in a vast natural maze that seemed to stretch for miles. Strange markings adorned the walls, some of which matched the glyphs from the ritual, others far older, their meaning lost to time or preserved only in forgotten dreams. I followed the tunnel blindly, guided by faint trails of glowing moss. From behind came faint echoes, static, commands, footsteps, but the sounds faded with time. Perhaps they couldn't find the entrance, or perhaps they dared not follow. Eventually, the slope inclined. I smelled rain, earth, life. I emerged through a narrow opening, veiled in vines, several miles from the main complex. The sky was choked with storm clouds. Thunder rolled. The rain came. Perfect cover, if I could make it to the road before they expanded the perimeter. But something was wrong. The forest wasn't empty. Shapes moved between the trees, not soldiers, not human. They wore the same owl masks from the inner circle, but they didn't walk. They glided. Their motion was too synchronized, too precise, and their eyes glowed softly with an unnatural light. The journalist sees too much, one said, its voice drifting across the storm without distortion. The ancient ones are displeased, another replied, but the covenant must be honored. Let him carry the message. Let them know what waits. I ran. Their laughter followed, not chasing me, mocking me, the way predators laugh when prey tries to flee the inevitable. I reached my rental car just as the storm broke in earnest. Rain pummeled the windshield as I sped into the night, avoiding main roads and surveillance. The documents I'd stolen felt like fire against my chest. I thought I was free. I wasn't. I uploaded everything to an offshore server, encrypted it, duplicated it, distributed the files to dark net archives and cold storage chains. Within 6 hours, everything was gone, corrupted, deleted, wiped clean. My apartment was raided, nothing taken, yet everything destroyed. Cameras, drives, even backup SD cards hidden in appliances, gone. Every media outlet I contacted ignored me. Even fringe blogs and conspiracy forums shut down any discussion. Posts vanished, threads disappeared, URLs redirected to dead pages. It was as if the entire internet had been sterilized. But worse than all that were the dreams, visions, nightmares, whatever they are, of massive beings, neither fully physical nor spiritual, slumbering in dimensions beyond our own, feeding on suffering, preparing to awaken. They whisper not warnings but prophecies. Cities drowned beneath black tides. Skies torn by winds that scream in languages we were never meant to hear. Humanity, broken, offered, harvested. And I'm no longer a threat to them. I'm their messenger. I wasn't shown the ritual to sound the alarm. I was shown it to destroy hope, to bring despair, to show the world how powerless it really is. And it's working. I'm writing this from a roadside motel in Reno. I haven't slept in days. I keep changing cars, changing direction. But I know the truth. They're not chasing me. They don't have to. I'm already doing their work, just by remembering. The cremation of care wasn't a purge of stress or guilt. It was a recruitment ritual, and I wasn't an intruder. I was initiated. Tonight I'll drive east, into the desert. Maybe I'll disappear forever. Or maybe I'll find a way to bury this story where someone braver than me can dig it up. But if you're reading this, then remember. They say they burn care. But what they really burn is conscience. And with every flame, the world grows colder. Darker, more prepared for what is coming back. The fire never really dies. It spreads, quietly, relentlessly, until all that makes us human is ash, and from the ash, something ancient and ravenous is about to be born. The Dyatlov Pass Incident. A new story begins. This is the authentic account of what is now known as the Dyatlov Pass Incident, a chilling enigma that has confounded researchers for more than 6 decades. My name is James, and I have devoted several weeks to poring over case files, journals, and eyewitness reports in an attempt to understand what befell 9 young hikers in the winter of 1959. The deeper I delve, the more the Dyatlov mystery reads like a haunting fable, suspended uneasily between reality and legend. Let us piece this together, step by step, as though we ourselves are reconstructing the investigation. It all began in the final days of January, 1959. A group of 10 seasoned cross-country skiers from the Ural Polytechnic Institute embarked on an ambitious journey to ascend a remote peak known as Otorten, nestled deep in the northern Urals. The team, composed of 7 men and 2 women mostly in their early 20s, was led by a 23-year-old student of radio engineering named Igor Dyatlov. The only older participant was an experienced trekking instructor, whose knowledge added credibility to the expedition. On the 23rd of January, they obtained official approval for their travel route and left Sverdlovsk, today called Yekaterinburg, by train. Picture them aboard the carriage, animated, hopeful, perhaps singing while one of them strummed a mandolin. After 2 days of travel, they reached a small settlement near a Soviet labor camp at the edge of the Urals. A bus carried them farther, and eventually they hitched a ride on a lumber truck, which brought them to the final inhabited village, Vijay. The locals likely observed the students with a blend of admiration and unease. The trail they intended to tackle had been classified as Category 3, denoting the highest level of difficulty, and they were attempting it in February, the region's harshest and most unforgiving month. On January 27th, the group departed Vijay and headed into the frozen expanse. One member, Yuri Yudin, had been battling chronic health problems. Diagnosed with rheumatism and a spinal defect, he suffered intense pain from long-distance hiking. On January 28th, he was forced to turn back due to worsening symptoms. That reluctant decision ultimately saved his life. Yudin would be the only member of the group to return home. He would never see his companions alive again. The remaining 9 continued deeper into the wilderness, unaware of the doom that awaited. Journal entries and recovered photographs later enabled investigators to retrace their movements. By the 31st of January, they had reached a plateau where they stashed surplus food and supplies in the forest to retrieve on their return. Spirits seemed high. They joked among themselves, snapped playful photos, and even assembled a mock newspaper they titled The Evening Otorten. One line humorously referenced local myths. From now on, we know that the snowmen exist. On February 1st, the group entered a mountain pass that would later bear Dyatlov's name. Their plan was to cross it and set up camp on the far side, but weather conditions rapidly deteriorated. A ferocious blizzard with near-zero visibility caused them to veer off course. Instead of reaching the wooded valley below, they ascended the slope of a peak called Kholat Shakho, a name which, in the language of the indigenous Mansi, ominously translates to Dead Mountain. By the time they recognized their error, daylight was fading. Rather than descend the 1.5 kilometers to the safety of the tree line, Dyatlov made a contentious decision. They would camp right there, on the barren slope. Some speculate he chose this to avoid losing altitude, or perhaps to demonstrate the group's endurance by withstanding the elements in open terrain. They pitched their tent on a flat expanse of snow, cutting into the slope to level it. That choice would later draw intense scrutiny. The night of February 1st, 1959, was brutally cold. Temperatures dipped near -20 degrees Celsius. Winds howled across the ridge. Still, inside the tent, the team found some shelter. Forensic evidence confirmed they had dinner between 6 and 7 in the evening. One of the last known photographs shows them smiling as they set up camp under the twilight sky. Despite the storm outside, they appeared composed, writing in journals, eating, preparing for sleep. None of them knew the horror that would descend just hours later. Sometime after midnight, something occurred. No witnesses survived. Only fragments of physical evidence remain, but they paint a disturbing picture. The tent had been violently torn open from within. The 9 hikers fled into the blizzard, dressed only in their sleeping garments. Some were barefoot. Others wore only socks. They left behind their boots, coats, food, gear, and maps, as if reacting to an urgent, unimaginable threat. Outside, temperatures plummeted to nearly -30 Celsius, around -22 Fahrenheit. And yet, whatever drove them from the tent overpowered every survival instinct. What could provoke such blind terror? That remains the central question, one that has perplexed searchers and skeptics alike for more than 60 years. When the group failed to return to Vijay by February 12th, there was no immediate alarm. Delays were common, but by February 20th, concerned families demanded action. The Ural Polytechnic Institute organized student search parties. Soon, the Soviet military joined, deploying aircraft and helicopters across the remote, snow-covered terrain. The rescuers braved punishing cold, deep snow and relentless winds. Among them was a student named Mikhail Sharavin. On February 26th, his search party made a haunting discovery. They located the hikers' collapsed, snow-covered tent on the slope of Kolatsyakol. Sharavin hacked through the frozen entrance with an ice axe. What they found inside defied explanation. The tent was sliced open from the inside. The hikers' belongings were arranged methodically: boots, jackets, navigational tools, even a metal plate with slices of salted pork. It looked as though the group had been preparing to eat, and then suddenly vanished. Outside the tent, 9 sets of footprints led downhill in a straight line. The prints showed individuals in socks, mismatched shoes, or completely barefoot. Strangely, the tracks indicated a calm, if urgent, descent. There were no signs of panic or disarray. The trail extended nearly 500 meters toward the forest, before disappearing beneath freshly fallen snow. It appeared they had intentionally headed into the woods. Searchers were stunned. What danger could cause experienced hikers to abandon shelter and walk into near-certain death? By dusk, worsening conditions halted the operation. The following morning, they resumed the search and moved toward the trees. At the forest's edge, beneath a towering cedar, they found a charred campfire. Next to it were 2 lifeless bodies, Yuri Doroshenko and Georgy Yuri Krivonishenko, wearing only undergarments, shoeless in the snow. 5 meters above, broken branches and scraps of flesh indicated one had tried to climb the tree, possibly to see the tent or evade a threat. Krivonishenko had burns on his body and a torn piece of flesh missing from his hand, likely bitten off by himself in a final, desperate act to stay conscious. Both men exhibited darkened extremities, a textbook sign of frostbite. They had stripped branches to feed the fire, but it burned out long before they succumbed. Just 300 meters uphill, rescuers found Igor Dyatlov's body lying on his back, head tilted toward the tent. He wore a sweater, flannel shirt, and trousers, but no outerwear. One hand clutched a small birch twig, the other pressed to his chest. Some speculated he was shielding a treasured item, though nothing of note was found. His frozen face was described as eerily peaceful. Nearby lay Zenaida Kolmogorova, a 22-year-old woman. Slightly better dressed, she had 2 pairs of pants and sweaters, but only socks on her feet. Her body faced the tent, arms extended forward, as if she had been crawling in desperation to return. A vivid bruise stretched across her torso, consistent with a baton strike or rifle butt. It was a singular, unexplained injury. The 5th body, Rustem Slobodin, was located on March 5th, around 480 meters from the cedar. He lay face down, clothed more warmly than the others, wearing layers of socks and one felt-lined boot. In his hand, he held a closed pocket knife. Autopsy revealed a substantial skull fracture, 7 inches in length, but the blow was not fatal. Experts believed he may have stumbled, sustained the injury, and continued moving for an hour before freezing. All 5 perished from hypothermia. There were no signs of a fight. Slobodin's shattered watch had stopped at 8:45, though whether that was morning, evening, or another day remains unknown. Now imagine Yuri Yudin, called back to identify the bodies of his friends. The 5 were flown to Ivdel for autopsy. With a breaking heart, Yudin confirmed each of them. 4 remained unaccounted for. As the thaw of spring arrived, melting snow unveiled more secrets. On May 4th, a Mansi man named Kurikov, aiding the search with his dog, caught a scent near a ravine 75 meters past the cedar and over 1,500 meters from the tent. Bits of fabric were found snagged on a tree. Digging into the snow-filled ravine, searchers unearthed the final 4 bodies beneath 4 meters of compacted snow. These were Lyudmila Dubinina, Semyon Zolotaryov, Nikolai Thibault-Brignol, and Alexander Kolevatov. Positioned closely together, they lay deeper in the forest. Curiously, they wore more clothing than the earlier victims, suggesting they had scavenged garments from their deceased friends. Dubinina wore Krivonishenko's burned trousers. Her foot was wrapped in part of his sweater. Thibault-Brignol had on Dubinina's fur-lined coat and hat. Kolevatov had layered extra pants and a sweater. This exchange of clothes reflected a grim, logical effort to survive. But the condition of their bodies revealed new horrors. Unlike the others, 3 suffered devastating trauma. Thibault-Brignol's skull was crushed, an 8-inch fracture. Dubinina and Zolotaryov had multiple broken ribs, 10 on her, 5 on him. Forensic experts stated the force required was comparable to a high-speed car crash. Bizarrely, there were no external wounds, no bruises or abrasions. It was as if a massive pressure had crushed their insides while sparing the skin. Kolevatov had a broken nose, an ear wound, and a distorted neck. His cause of death was undetermined, but likely linked to exposure. Even more disturbing were the facial mutilations. Dubinina had lost her tongue, eyes, and portions of her lips and skull. Zolotaryov's eyes were missing. Kolevatov had no eyebrows. These injuries sparked rumors of violence or ritual mutilation. Yet, medical authorities offered a more practical view. The 4 were found in a creek bed. Exposure to water and scavenging animals likely caused the damage. Dubinina's autopsy found blood in her stomach, implying her heart was still beating when her tongue was lost, possibly just after death. Still, the images shocked the public. Conspiracy theories flourished. Murder, Soviet secrecy, even supernatural interference. Zolotaryov, oddly, had a camera slung around his neck and a pen and notepad in hand. The pad was blank. The camera model differed from those documented earlier. Authorities opened a criminal investigation. Early suspicion fell on the local mansi, but there was no evidence, no footprints, no conflict, no motive. The mansi had even aided the search. Avalanche theory was floated next, but did not align with the undisturbed tent or trail. No animal attack made sense either. There were no matching injuries or predator tracks. Ultimately, Soviet investigators declared that no foul play by humans occurred. One pathologist concluded the force that killed Dubinina and Zolotaryov was beyond what any person could inflict. Then, a curious Cold War detail emerged. Traces of radiation were found on Dubinina's sweater and Krivonishenko's pants. The anomaly might have gone unnoticed, if not for a curious investigator with a Geiger counter. Had the group wandered into a weapons test? Been exposed to fallout? More plausible explanations surfaced. Krivonishenko had worked at the Mayak nuclear plant and helped clean the 1957 Kishtim disaster. His clothes may have retained radioactive residue. Kolevatov also worked at a classified nuclear institute. So, while the radiation was real, it was likely unrelated to their deaths. Nevertheless, some families claimed the corpses had darkened skin or graying hair, stirring fresh rumors of nuclear or chemical exposure. Authorities insisted the skin discoloration observed on the bodies was eventually attributed to natural mummification, a result of prolonged exposure to extreme cold and sunlight. Similarly, hair can lighten due to environmental conditions or chemical changes caused during the embalming process. But in 1959, to grieving families already shaken by rumors, the combination of radioactive clothing and orange-tinged skin felt like something pulled from the script of a Cold War science fiction thriller. By May of that same year, The official investigation was nearing its end, still with no concrete explanation. Lead investigator Lev Ivanov faced significant pressure to bring the inquiry to a close. In his final report, Ivanov stated that the hikers died due to the influence of an unknown compelling force. It was a deliberately vague, all-encompassing phrase, essentially admitting that they had no definitive answers. There was no evidence of criminal activity, and the case was formally closed without any charges filed. The documents were stamped, classified, and locked away in Soviet archives. For the next 3 years, the region surrounding Dyatlov Pass was declared off-limits to any future expeditions. Officially, this was done to prevent further accidents, but many suspected it was a calculated move to keep investigators and curious outsiders far away. The inquest's conclusion, that the hikers died because of an uncontrollable natural force, only intensified the mystery rather than resolving it. Imagine the silence that followed. 9 young lives lost, and their families told they would never know why. In the Soviet Union of 1959, that was the end of the road. Some of the victims' relatives felt there was a cover-up. Zenaida Kolmogoreva's mother, along with Igor Dyatlov's parents, reportedly received indirect warnings. Officials allegedly told them, "You will never learn the truth, so stop asking." In that era, when a message came from the KGB or the Communist Party, people listened, and they kept quiet, out of fear. The families laid their children to rest with unanswered questions, and over time, the Dyatlov case faded into the shadows of Cold War folklore. It survived in whispers, in university lecture halls, mountaineering clubs, and hushed late-night kitchen conversations. As for Yuri Yudin, the only survivor who had turned back early, he lived the rest of his life haunted by guilt and obsessed with finding the truth. Yudin never accepted the idea that a freak weather event had killed his friends. Deep down, he was convinced that human hands were behind their deaths. In interviews before his passing in 2013, Yudin publicly accused the Soviet government of hiding key facts. Shortly before his death, he made a chilling claim. He believed the hikers had been forced from their tent at gunpoint and executed. He even speculated that Lyudmila Dubinina's tongue had been removed because she had spoken out the most. These were serious allegations, and Yudin had no hard proof, just decades of unresolved doubt. Whether he was right or wrong, his steadfast beliefs showed just how deeply the Dyatlov mystery could embed itself into the human psyche. And now, decades later, I find myself in Yudin's position, poring over yellowed documents, unsealed reports, and new interpretations. With every new piece of information, I can almost feel the frigid wind sweeping down from Dead Mountain. The Dyatlov Pass incident continues to stand as one of the most perplexing mysteries in modern history, precisely because it sits on the border between science and something unknowable. Over the years, a multitude of theories have surfaced, some backed by scientific research, others veering into the realm of conspiracy or the paranormal. Let's examine these possibilities one by one, like diverging trails leading from the same haunted origin. A truly viable theory must address all of the bizarre details: the tent's destruction from within, the hiker's state of undress, the strange internal injuries, radiation traces, reports of strange lights in the sky, and the cloud of secrecy that followed. It's no small task, but let's explore these paths together. The most widely accepted theory today is the one eventually endorsed by modern Russian authorities: an avalanche. To many, this theory fits best. Imagine the scenario: 9 exhausted hikers asleep in a tent on a slope. Without warning, a section of snow above them breaks free and crashes down. The canvas of the tent crumples. A deafening rumble fills the air. Panic erupts. The group believes a full avalanche is seconds away. They react immediately. Perhaps the tent's main entrance is buried or blocked. so they slice through the fabric from inside and flee into the storm, not bothering to grab supplies. Their movements are frantic but calculated. This theory gained traction in 2019 and 2020, when Russian authorities reopened the case and officially concluded that a slab avalanche was to blame. In the same period, a separate scientific team used sophisticated computer simulations to support the avalanche theory. Seen through this lens, the hikers' behavior makes sense. Faced with the imminent threat of burial, their instinct was to escape first and worry about warmth and gear later. Proponents of this theory suggest that the snow slab, possibly triggered by high winds or heat from the hiker's stove, collapsed onto the tent, producing strange, unsettling noises. As trained outdoorsmen, they would have recognized these sounds and acted immediately, heading for the lower, wooded area near the tree line where they hoped to regroup and survive. They did not stop to get dressed or collect equipment. Every moment counted. They traveled nearly a mile through the wind and snow. Evidence shows they built a small fire under a cedar tree in an attempt to stay alive. Not far from that site, they began to dig a snow cave beside a ravine and used fir branches for insulation against the cold. News story: The Tunguska Conspiracy. Greetings to all listeners of Sleep Theories. Before we begin tonight's episode, I hope your day or night is peaceful, wherever you may be. Whether you're listening from London at midnight, New York in the late afternoon, or just waking up in Tokyo, these stories are here to connect us across time and distance. If this is your first time tuning in, consider subscribing to Sleep Theories for more narratives that blur the lines between history and mystery. Now, get comfortable as we journey into a tale long buried in Soviet secrecy, one that hasn't surfaced until now. Dr. Alexei Morozov, Soviet Geological Survey, Tunguska Region, Siberia, October 1959. Classification: Top Secret, Declassified 2025. Entry: 1, October 12, 1959. Audio. Quality: poor, wind interference. This is Dr. Alexei Morozov, reporting on behalf of the Soviet Geological Survey, assignment number 4471. I'm making this recording for the scientific archive, although I strongly suspect it will never be heard by anyone outside our immediate circle. The date is October 12, 1959. I am currently stationed approximately 40 kilometers southeast of the Tunguska impact zone, and I believe we may have made a terrible error in coming here. Let me start from the beginning. 3 weeks ago, I received an urgent summons to Moscow. I assumed it was from the Academy of Sciences, but when I arrived, I was escorted not to their offices, but to an unmarked gray building near Lubyanka Square. Even as a geophysicist, I knew what that location meant. Inside, a man in a crisp Soviet military uniform awaited me. His demeanor was clinical, his stare precise, cold. It was clear he was KGB. "Dr. Morozov," he said without preamble, "your expertise is required for a matter of national interest." He slid several high-resolution photographs across a metallic table. Satellite imagery, far too advanced for civilian use. The pictures depicted the Tunguska region, but something in them was clearly abnormal. Geometric overlays were visible, hexagonal radiation patterns etched into the forest floor. "What am I seeing?" I asked. "I am Colonel Volov," he replied flatly, "and you are looking at evidence that the Tunguska explosion of 1908 was not caused by a meteor." The images were deeply unsettling. Radiation traces formed symmetrical patterns over several kilometers. Nothing nature could produce by accident. "These were captured by Cosmos satellites 3 months ago," Volov continued. "More than 50 years later, the site is still active." He pointed to timestamps on the energy readings. They weren't random. The pulses came at exact intervals, like a signal. This points to an artificial source, I said cautiously. Precisely, Volov responded, his smile devoid of comfort. That's why you're going to Tunguska. Your cover will be a geological survey for the 5-year mineral plan. Your actual mission is to locate the origin of those signals. And if I decline, I asked, you'll be reassigned to mineral studies in a much less forgiving part of Siberia, indefinitely. It was no idle threat. I accepted the mission by nightfall. Now, sitting inside a wind-blasted tent, surrounded by trees still bent from the blast 5 decades ago, I understand why earlier missions submitted only partial reports, if any. There is something deeply unnatural about this forest, something beyond geology or physics. This morning, my instruments recorded the first anomaly, Entry 2, October 13th, 1959. Audio quality, moderate, electronic interference detected. The electromagnetic data defy interpretation. I spent the entire day conducting a gridded series of measurements, advancing steadily toward what the Kulik expedition of 1927 designated as the epicenter of the Tunguska event. Yet none of my instruments, magnetometer, Geiger counter, seismograph, register behavior consistent with any known physical phenomena. Rather than observing a gradual intensification of the magnetic field, as one might expect from subsurface metal, the field pulses with mechanical precision, one surge every 3 seconds. Pulse, silence. Pulse, silence. A rhythmic cadence, unnervingly biological, almost like a heartbeat. The radiation readings are even more bewildering. Instead of a uniform increase in background levels, expected if this had been the site of a nuclear detonation, the Geiger counter shows radiation forming distinct, sharply defined shapes. When charted, the data form near-perfect hexagons, each roughly 50 meters across, repeating in a honeycomb formation that extends far beyond my current measurement perimeter. Colonel Volov remains largely mute throughout our fieldwork. He carries no scientific instruments, only a radio kit that appears far more advanced than standard geological issue. Twice a day, he transmits coded messages to Moscow, using encryption I cannot decode. Our local guides have flatly refused to follow us past the outer edge of the blast zone. They speak in wary tones of lights moving beneath the ice, and a strange auditory phenomenon they describe as iron screaming. When I pressed the eldest guide for clarity, he offered only a cryptic warning. The sky fell there, but something else rose up. I had dismissed this as superstition until last night. At precisely 3 o'clock in the morning, I was roused by a vibration, deep, resonant, and unlike any sound I've ever encountered. It seemed to emanate directly from the earth beneath us. It lasted exactly 3 minutes, then stopped with surgical abruptness. Volov was already awake, standing motionless at the perimeter of our camp with the radio in his hand. "Did you record that?" he asked, without turning. I hadn't, and the omission haunts me now. The sound was so profoundly alien that my brain refused to register it properly. It didn't belong here. It didn't belong anywhere. "What was it?" I asked. His face, illuminated by the moonlight, was unreadable. "That," he said, "is why we're here. This morning, I discovered that several of my devices had not merely malfunctioned, but had done so in eerily consistent and impossible ways. My magnetometer now points to magnetic north as being directly beneath the blast center, regardless of where I stand. Meanwhile, the seismograph recorded a perfect sine wave at 3-second intervals throughout the night. Geologic systems do not behave with such rhythmic precision. Something beneath the permafrost is active, and it is calling. Entry 3, October 15th, 1959. Audio quality poor, severe electronic interference. We have reached the epicenter. Now, I understand why Kulik's expedition found no crater. This was not an impact site. It was a point of emergence. The devastation radiates outward in all directions for several kilometers. Trees are laid flat in a near-perfect radial pattern, something that has baffled researchers for decades. And yet, at the exact center, within a circular area approximately 100 meters across, the forest is untouched. The trees remain standing, bark scorched but unbroken, as though the blast flowed around them rather than through. But the soil beneath tells another story. My analysis reveals the presence of metallic fragments buried deep below. More troubling are their isotopic signatures. These are not naturally occurring ratios. The configurations suggest engineered materials, constructed from isotopes that do not exist in any known natural environment. While collecting samples earlier today, my spade struck something. After an hour of slow, careful excavation, I uncovered a shard of metal unlike anything I have encountered in over 2 decades of field research. It measures about 15 centimeters in length. Its surface is flawless, dark as obsidian, and it reflects no light. It is optically absent. My vision blurs when I stare at it, as though my perception is trying to reject what it sees. Worse still, it vibrates. A faint, continuous tremor. Frequency, precisely 3 hertz, the same rhythm as the magnetic pulses I've been recording. When I handed the artifact to Colonel Volov, his reaction confirmed my worst fears. "Where did you find this?" he demanded, seizing it from my grasp using gloved hands. "Roughly 2 meters beneath our current position," I replied. "You will mark that location exactly," he said sharply, "and you will dig no further." He placed the fragment into a lead-lined case I hadn't noticed before. "Your mission is to measure and report. You are not authorized to recover specimens." "But Colonel, this could be the key to Dr. Morozov." His voice was quiet, clipped, and utterly final. The last scientist who asked too many questions about what we found here is now buried under 2 meters of ice. Do I make myself clear? The implied threat was delivered with such detached cruelty that it took me a full moment to grasp its meaning. Previous scientists, previous missions, how many had come before us? That evening, while Volov was distracted with his radio, I returned to the site and resumed measurements. The results were staggering. Ground-penetrating radar revealed the upper layer of a vast subterranean structure. Hexagonal chambers connected by linear corridors. Too regular, too aligned to be a natural formation. This is no debris field. It is architecture, and it extends far deeper than any of our current instruments can penetrate. Whatever lies beneath Tunguska is not of this world, and it has been here for a very long time. Carbon dating of the surrounding soil indicates the structure predates the explosion of 1908 by millennia, perhaps even tens of thousands of years. That explosion didn't bring something here. It unearthed something that was already buried. Entry 4, October 17th, 1959. Audio. Quality moderate. Background. Humming noted. I have broken protocol. I accessed Colonel Volov's classified files. It was a risk, perhaps a fatal one, but the pull of discovery outweighed caution. Scientific obsession has always been my flaw. While Volov was absorbed in his evening transmission, I photographed select pages from his locked case. What I found has shattered my understanding of this mission, and of the Tunguska event itself. The documents include telegrams dating back to the early 20th century, specifically an exchange between inventor Nikola Tesla and Arctic explorer Robert Peary. Tesla described experimental tests conducted at his Wardenclyffe facility on Long Island, focused on transmitting electrical energy wirelessly through Earth's atmosphere. The Arctic was designated as the test area, where Peary was actively exploring at the time. One telegram, dated June 28, 1908, just 2 days before the Tunguska explosion, read, "Peary, final test scheduled 0214 GMT, June 30th. Expect atmospheric disturbance, Arctic region. Use extreme caution. Energy discharge may exceed projections." Tesla. Peary's reply, dated July 2nd, read, "Tesla, your test exceeded all expectations. Sky over Siberia lit like daylight. Effect visible from Greenland. Native reports describe ground quaking hundreds of meters from impact site. Whatever you triggered, it responded. Recommend immediate termination of experiments. Peary." The most unsettling document was a private journal entry by Tesla, later seized by Soviet intelligence. The transmission was a success, but not in the way we intended. We awakened something that should have remained dormant. The beam reached beyond the sky. It pierced ancient ice. What we believed to be an experiment was, in fact, a call. We are not the first, only the most careless. Wardenclyffe Tower was dismantled shortly after the blast. Officially, Tesla had gone bankrupt, but the KGB records suggest another motive. In a separate letter, Tesla warned, "Some discoveries are too dangerous for the world as it is." Further, KGB memos revealed the Soviet government had monitored the Tunguska site for decades. Geological surveys in the 1930s documented structural anomalies identical to those I've now recorded. Their findings were classified, and many of those researchers were either reassigned or quietly removed. Since 1945, at least 3 expeditions have been dispatched. 2 disappeared without a trace. The third, led by a doctor, Yuri Petrov, ended in tragedy. His final journal described endless hexagonal rooms and a sound like the Earth exhaling. This current expedition was only greenlit after Cosmos satellite scans in 1957 showed a sharp increase in radiation and electromagnetic patterns emanating from the site. These patterns are escalating. Each night, at exactly 3 o'clock, the low hum begins. Always 3 minutes in duration, but tonight the sound is louder, more organized. I swear it contains structure, mathematical sequences, logic. Volov watches me differently now. He suspects. He knows I've seen the files. If anything happens to me, I can only hope this journal lasts long enough to expose the truth about what we've found here at Tunguska. The blast in 1908 was not caused by a meteorite, nor was it, in any complete sense, the result of Tesla's wireless energy experiment, though that may have served as the trigger. It was a reaction, an ancient one, something unimaginably old, long entombed beneath the permafrost, was awakened by our signal. Entry 5, October 19, 1959. Audio quality, excellent. All interference ceased. The silence is more unsettling than the noise ever was. For 3 consecutive days, electromagnetic interference had intensified. Contact with Moscow was completely severed. My instruments began recording values that exceeded their designed operating limits. The low, rhythmic pulses from beneath the ground increased in intensity and duration with each passing hour. And then, at dawn today, everything stopped. No signals, no anomalies, no tremors. A sudden, absolute stillness. The absence feels far more ominous than the anomalies that came before. It implies that something has ended, some process completed. Something beneath us has finished what it began. Colonel Volov received new orders overnight through an emergency radio frequency. We were to begin excavation at once. Heavy equipment arrived by air under the cover of darkness. Among the cargo were advanced drills, tools far too sophisticated for any routine geological task. "We're going in," Volov told me with no preamble. "Moscow demands answers." "Colonel," I replied, "I strongly advise caution. We don't yet understand the composition or stability of this structure." "Dr. Morozov," he cut me off coldly, "you're here to observe. The decision has already been made." The drilling began at precisely 0800 hours. The initial layers of permafrost gave way easily, but at a depth of approximately 5 meters, the bit struck something unexpected. Not stone, not metal, but a material that rang out with a resonant chime, like a bell. By midday, a section of the surface had been exposed. What we uncovered cannot be explained by known geology. The material is composed of hexagonal plates, each roughly 2 meters wide, interlocked with mathematical precision. The structure is harder than steel, yet exhibits a crystalline quality, as if it had grown organically rather than being forged. The most disturbing revelation came when we brushed away the final layer of ice and soil. The plates had not decayed. They bore no sign of corrosion or aging. They shimmered, clean, flawless, as if crafted only yesterday. And then the light returned. A pulse of energy every 3 seconds. The exact rhythm I've been documenting for weeks. The structure is still active, possibly alive, though no word in our language feels adequate to describe what we're witnessing. As the surface was further exposed, new energy signatures emerged. The pulses no longer seemed random. They followed deliberate sequences, prime numbers, Fibonacci ratios, and other universal constants. Signals steeped in intelligence. "It's communicating," I said aloud during a short break. "It's trying to speak to us." Volov shook his head gravely. "No, Doctor, it's speaking to something else. We're just overhearing the conversation." That evening, while analyzing the data, I discovered something that shook me to my core. The electromagnetic patterns I've been recording match unexplained radio anomalies first detected decades ago by the Jodrell Bank Observatory in England. Phenomena long dismissed as cosmic background radiation. But those signals weren't coming from deep space. They originate here, from Tunguska, and they have been broadcasting outward, into the universe, ever since 1908. Whatever lies beneath our feet has been calling out for over 50 years. Entry 6, October 21st, 1959. Audio quality poor. Voice exhibits signs of stress. We've breached the structure. After 48 hours of precise excavation, we opened a passage large enough to lower instruments, and eventually personnel, into the chamber below. What we discovered is beyond comprehension. The space inside is massive. The walls arc away into darkness, far beyond the range of our floodlights. The air isn't musty or thin, as one might expect underground. It's warm, metallic, charged with static that seems to crawl over your skin. The walls are constructed from the same hexagonal plates, but here they are dynamic. Light flows across their surfaces in sweeping, synchronized pulses, like circuitry inside a living engine. Ignoring direct orders from Colonel Volov, I descended into the structure using climbing gear. He had insisted we wait for specialists from Moscow, but I could not resist the need to see it with my own eyes. What I found down there has no frame of reference in human technology. The space is not empty. It is filled with constructs that resemble machines, though that word is pitifully insufficient. Crystalline geometries rise from the floor like frozen flora, their surfaces shifting constantly, realigning themselves in ways that defy logic. These are not static devices. They evolve, self-modify, and appear to repair themselves in real time. At the center of the chamber stands a vertical column, 3 meters tall, formed from the same obsidian-like material as the fragment I discovered days ago. But unlike that inert shard, this structure is active, alive with light, resonating with that same 3 Hz frequency. When I touched it, the entire chamber responded. Light surged across every surface. The machines vibrated with harmonic energy, and I felt something. Not a physical force, but a mind, a presence, immense, ancient, and aware. In that instant, I understood what Tesla had truly done in 1908. He hadn't simply broadcast electrical current into the upper atmosphere. He had found a resonant frequency, a harmonic window in Earth's magnetic field, and it had pierced directly into this buried monolith. The explosion that followed wasn't an accident. It was activation. The structure beneath Tunguska had remained dormant for thousands of years, until Tesla's signal woke it. That massive blast was not destruction. It was ignition. The only path for the surge of reactivated energy was upward, obliterating the forest in an instant. When I returned to the surface, I found Colonel Volov engaged in a high-level transmission with Moscow. "Yes, sir, it appears operational," I overheard him say. "No, sir, we have not yet determined its function. What do you mean, similar structures?" That phrase chilled me to my core. Similar structures. How many more exist? How long have they slept beneath our feet? Later that night, while I tried to come to terms with this revelation, the structure began transmitting again. But this time, the signals had changed. They were no longer mere pulses. They carried meaning. My instruments detected layered frequencies, variations in amplitude, traits consistent with artificial modulation. The structure had awoken. And now it was sending messages. Entry 7, October 23, 1959. Audio quality clear, voice controlled but strained. They are coming for me. This morning, Colonel Volov received final orders. The expedition is to be terminated immediately. All physical evidence is to be secured, and all personnel are to be debriefed. I know what that means. Late last night, a new team arrived, men without insignias, speaking in accents I could not place. They carried specialized tools and sealed containers. Their demeanor was not scientific. This mission has moved into another domain entirely, one I was never meant to be part of. "Dr. Morozov," Volov said over a meager breakfast, "your work has been noted. However, due to the nature of our findings, certain protocols must now be enforced." "What kind of protocols?" I asked. "The kind that keeps state secrets from leaving state hands. I have taken steps to preserve what I can. My journal, data, and audio recordings have been hidden in a sealed cache, approximately 1 kilometer northeast of our base camp. If I do not survive to retrieve them, perhaps someone else will. Before they erase me, let me record one final truth. The structure beneath Tunguska is not of human origin. Its design, its materials, its internal systems, all point to a civilization beyond anything our species can comprehend. Based on geological evidence, I estimate it has remained buried for no fewer than 10,000 years, possibly much longer. It is not a weapon, it is a transmitter, a lighthouse of sorts, sending a signal across the stars. The pulses, every 3 seconds, are not arbitrary. They are coordinates. A mathematical beacon, broadcasting Earth's presence to the wider cosmos. When Nikola Tesla tested his experiment in 1908, he didn't just release energy, he lit the flare. The enormous energy release that triggered the Tunguska explosion was not caused by a meteor strike or an accident. It was the result of ancient machinery reactivating. Like a dormant generator buried for geological ages, it abruptly roared back to life. But the most terrifying part of this revelation is what it implies about the history of our planet. If one such device lies buried beneath the Siberian wilderness, how many more exist beneath the Earth's surface? Who created them, and for what purpose? I no longer believe we are alone in the universe. More disturbingly, I suspect we never were. Since the beginning of our excavation, the electromagnetic signals from the Tunguska site have grown in both strength and complexity. What initially appeared as basic mathematical patterns has evolved into something far more sophisticated: exchanges of structured data, call and response sequences, acknowledgments, and confirmations. Something is answering the signal. Last night, I witnessed lights in the sky, unlike any known atmospheric or celestial phenomenon. These objects moved with deliberate precision, forming geometric patterns synchronized with the timing of the underground transmissions. They hovered silently above our camp for nearly 1 hour before vanishing beyond the horizon. Volov pretended not to see them, but I noticed that he remained in constant radio contact with Moscow for the rest of the night. This morning, he informed us that the mission was now complete. Complete? I asked. We've barely begun to comprehend what we've uncovered. We've confirmed the existence of anomalous subsurface structures and documented their primary characteristics, he replied. That was our assignment, to identify the source of the satellite anomalies. What we've found could alter the entire understanding of human history, I said. We're on the verge of a discovery that changes everything. Volov's face remained impassive. Dr. Morozov, there are forces at work here far beyond the limits of science. This site will be classified at the highest levels and placed under indefinite surveillance. Your part in this is over. And if I refuse to stay quiet, then you'll join the others who ask questions they were not meant to ask. The threat was delivered without emotion. I understood the choice before me: silence or death. But I will not allow this truth to be buried. Entry 8, October 24th, 1959. Final entry: audio quality low, whispered, recorded in secret. They believe I'm asleep. The debriefing began this afternoon with injections, supposedly vaccines for Arctic diseases. But I recognized the symptoms immediately. Memory suppression agents meant to cloud recall and leave survivors confused, incoherent. My training in Antarctica had prepared me for such tactics. I induced vomiting as soon as the injection was administered, pretending to comply while neutralizing the drug's effects. Now, while they believe me sedated, I've retrieved my hidden cache and am recording this final message. In a few hours, I will be flown to Moscow for extended debriefing. I do not expect to return. Before they silence me, I must share what I now know. The structure beneath Tunguska is not just a transmitter. It is part of a vast network. During my last descent into the chamber, I discovered corridors branching out in multiple directions. I followed one as far as my equipment allowed. At its furthest point, I picked up faint electromagnetic emissions, nearly identical to those at the Tunguska site, originating from locations thousands of kilometers away. This is a global system, a lattice of buried constructs, aligned precisely with the Earth's magnetic field. The civilization that created this network was not terrestrial. The constants embedded in their design, gravitational harmonics, stellar ratios, pointed to an origin well beyond our solar system. They came here, they built these systems, and then they vanished. But they left the network intact, dormant, preserved, waiting. In 1908, Nikola Tesla inadvertently reactivated one of the nodes. His wireless energy transmission, though visionary in purpose, struck the Tunguska structure at precisely the frequency required to awaken it. The beacon resumed its broadcast. announcing Earth's presence to the stars. And something has heard the call. The lights I observed in the sky are not meteorological events. They are artificial. Reconnaissance craft. Scouts. The signals I've been recording are not idle communication. They are structured, coordinated. They contain data, instructions, coordinates, timelines, plans. This is not exploration. It is reconnaissance. We have awakened a mechanism that was never meant to be disturbed, and we lack both the understanding to interpret it and the tools to contain it. I can hear them now, outside the tent. Footsteps crunching over frozen soil, voices murmuring in languages I cannot place. They've realized I'm no longer in the infirmary. If this recording is ever recovered, if someone finds this cache and deciphers what I've left behind, know this. The event in 1908 was not the conclusion of a mystery. It was the opening act of a sequence. The door was never locked. It is opening. Whatever happens next, do not dig further. It hears, it remembers, and now it knows we are here. Recording ends. Electromagnetic interference. Resumes Soviet state security. Archive. Reference Tunguska Black 7. Date October 30th, 1959. Doctor. Alexei Morozov was found deceased in his quarters at the Lubyanka Medical Facility on October 29, 1959. Official cause of death. Complications from frostbite sustained during Arctic research. Status of personal belongings. Seized and classified under state security protocol. All materials connected to the Tunguska operation are hereby sealed under Special Protocol 7. Access restricted to individuals with clearance level obsidian or above. The Tunguska site is now designated as a permanent restricted military zone. Unauthorized access is punishable by death. End of official record. Posted to Secure File Sharing Network, March 15, 2025. Removed at request of the Russian Federation. March 17, 2025. The content above was recovered from a cache of declassified Soviet documents leaked after a major collapse in regional intelligence systems. Authentication is ongoing, but preliminary forensics suggest the materials are genuine. Contrary to public reports, Doctor, Morozov's journal was not destroyed. It was hidden, preserved beneath the ice, waiting to be found. Satellite imagery captured in late 2024 has revealed renewed activity at the Tunguska site. Multiple independent monitoring stations have detected electromagnetic distortions consistent with those recorded in 1959. Structures of unknown origin are being constructed at the coordinates provided by Dr. Morozov. The lights have returned to the skies above Siberia. Whatever Nikola Tesla awakened in 1908 was not the end. It was the beginning. The door is not merely open, it is wide.